Okay, can I just say I'm very happy to be here. This is my first visit to Nigeria, and so I'm delighted to be here. I think the I think the Kaduna fair is fantastic. It's really, really vibrant. I love the energy that is going on around here. It's very exciting to be here, and I would like to thank my hosts to bring me here. Thank you very much. Your question about
why do you write?
Why do I write? Okay, why do I write? Well, I didn't. I grew up a very avid reader. I was very happy reading novels. I studied statistics at the University of Khartoum, and I was quite content to read, and I didn't really practice any writing. And then there was a plan that I would go to the UK, specifically to the London School of Economics, and get my PhD in statistics and then come back to Sudan and teach. But I failed to get my PhD, and so my husband found a job in Scotland. And so I found myself suddenly, after some turbulence, I was in Scotland with two very young children, having failed the PhD. So this was a big trauma for me, because it was like you're thinking your life is going in a certain direction, and suddenly it veers in a different direction. So to make sense of it, I started going to the public library, and it's wonderful to have access to books. And I started to read, especially women's writing, and to kind of make sense of my life and what was I going to do now. And in Sudan, you can't really teach in university. I don't know about here, but you can't teach without a PhD. So to me, this was like, oh, my university career has derailed. So. So I started writing just as a way of expressing, my homesickness. I was teaching. I found a job teaching in college statistics, and that was extremely unfulfilling because the students were rude, and it was just not. It was not. My mother is a feminist, and she's a university professor, and she had led me to believe that a woman working outside the house was a distinguished thing. And so, but I found myself in this college in Scotland, and there was nothing distinguished about it at all. So I started to write, and I remember writing a very short piece and showing it to my husband, and he was like, "Oh, I can't believe you wrote this." And I was very flattered with this. And so things, led on from there. I went to workshops, and it developed from there. But the first impetus was the need to explore the immigrant status, the movement, the change in my life, women's issues. So this is how it started, and then it developed, yeah.
Why do you write?
Why do I write? I think I've been asked this question many, many, many times. And I think each time I was asked, I gave different answers. So, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency, my colleague, and my aunt's daughter. Do you know that she's the daughter of Ama Ata Aido? I was so happy to see her because I was with her mother at Dallas in Texas in 2012, and we celebrated her 70th birthday. And I tell you, she's a very nice woman. So when I saw her today, I saw the face of Ama Ata Aido. Okay, I will try and be honest this time round. It's nice to say that I write because I want to empower women. I want women to have economic empowerment, political empowerment, psychological empowerment. That's very nice to say, but maybe that came much, much later on. I started writing because I was a very bad speaker. And I had a phobia. for public appearance. I still have that. You know. But with age, I think I have not conquered it, but I'm not doing badly, am I? Okay. So I actually started writing because I discovered that when I was in school and a teacher who happened to be Europeans at Queen Elizabeth Secondary School in Lorin, we had them, more than 3/4 were either English people or American people. They noticed me that whenever we had assignment in literature, I would get A or B+, and yet in class, my hand was never up. So you know how they are? They identified that, and they respected the fact that that was me. I could not speak, and they encouraged me to put my thoughts on paper. So by the time that I was 20 and married, and I was a student, I started writing, but it wasn't for publication. I was writing to express myself. So the stillborn actually came out as an accident because there was a fine gentleman, Professor Stuart Brown, who was my teacher, and he established a journal, Kakaki Journal, at Bayero University, Kano. So he was asking for short stories. And I had written like some 30 pages. I called my first 3 chapters. So I decided to show him, but I begged him not to expose the manuscript to anybody. The next thing I knew, he went home on vacation in England, and he read the story over the BBC. Yes, that was how I came. Yes, that's how I started.
Thank you. Back to you again. You have said I read it online, that, and I'm quoting you, that your writing follows your own psychological growth, and that you are writing your own personal story, which I took not in terms of the personal, but the personal is expansive. So can you speak a little bit about that and tie it into whom do you write for? And then tell us whether you feel a burden or an imperative to represent Muslim women in your writing and how you do that.
Okay. Sorry, I forget so quickly. What did you say I said?
You said... You said that my writing follows my own psychological growth. Yes. I'm writing my own personal story.
Yes. I will still say that because it followed my own psychological growth in the sense that unlike some people who said they do not write because of any trauma in their lives. They do not write because of any trauma or any serious thing in their lives. I think I write as a therapy sometimes. Writing has been the only thing that has helped me pull through a lot of things, including depression. Yes, so, and I must confess, I have had some serious depressions. But whenever that happens, here with us in Nigeria, anything to do with some mental unease, we are so afraid of that. And there's a stigma attached to that, we don't have enough doctors, psychiatrists, or psychologists, or those people who can help you. And mental unease, we are even afraid to say illness, is something common as physical illness. So you find that somebody is depressed and there is no way out. Fortunately for me, when I feel down or depressed, I take pen to paper. And that has been my therapy.
So to continue from that, then, do you intend for the writing that you do to provide comfort or a way out for other Muslim women who may be, or other women who may be depressed?
Well, thank you, yes. But initially it was a selfish venture. I was writing for myself. I didn't know that I will impact on anybody.
Okay.
But as I started getting reviews and comments and very nice people telling me that my writings have impacted on them, I started developing this idea that, okay, maybe I am doing something right after all. Okay. Maybe I am getting out of myself and reaching other people who may be having problems, especially women.
Thank you. Leila, to you, and the same issue, but I want to come at it from, you have said that in your writing, you want to make Sudan a valid place. And when I read that, I was reminded of what Nuruddin Farah said about writing Somalia. So can you talk about that a little bit? Is that, do you write for Sudanese? Do you write to counter stereotypes? And for whom are you writing? Yeah.
As I said, of course, it started very personally, but I started writing in the UK. So I was conscious then that the people around me didn't know much about Sudan. It was one of these countries that they didn't know about. And you're lucky because Nigeria is very popular in Britain. So people know British people are comfortable with Nigeria, with the Nigerian literature. But Sudan is an unknown towards them. It's kind of shrouded in, it's obscure. So, and what comes out of it is usually negative, the war, the famine, things like that. So for me, it just, because I was homesick and I was resistant to this vibe I was getting, like, what are you homesick for goodness sake? You should be grateful that you're not there. So at that time I was young and I was still, defiant against this. And I was saying, no, I am homesick. I feel homesick. What am I homesick for? Therefore I'm writing what I'm homesick for, what I'm missing, what there isn't, what I can't find here. So that was where it came from. But I think as a writer, there's different aspects to it. You're, of course, what fuels the writing, and that could be a passion, it could be trauma, it could be therapy. But at the end, you're ending up with a product that you can edit and that you're self-consciously shaping into something that the reader will read. And readers are not going to only read one novel by one writer. They read a lot of writing, So it's like a whole feast. Literature is a whole feast for them. One day they want something spicy. One day they want something, wholesome vegetables. Or one day they want something, just a drink of water. Or it's a different thing. So you're giving them something to complement what the other things that they are reading at the same. You're giving them that, and you're not really thinking of a particular reader in mind. But when I'm really cornered to answer this question, I would say I'm writing for the reader who reads the same books I've been reading. Okay, so in a way, we all belong to a reading club, and I have read Chimamanda Adichie, I have read Safi Atta, I have read, also Kazuo Ichiguri or Jane Eyre, or and so we're all together in this, yeah.
My next question goes back to our topic as Muslim women writers. I want you to explore how you treat Islam, and particularly, do you treat Islam as a culture in the books that you write, or as faith, or as both? And when you are answering it, I would like you to talk a little bit about how you treat it in Minaret, where the heroine uses Islam more as a faith to overcome what she has gone through. Mm-hmm.
A lot of questions. Well, when I was feeling homesick for Sudan, I mean, it was one of the things that I missed, hearing the azan, for example. So now here, when I came to Kaduna and I'm hearing the azan, it feels very special for me, and it makes me think, it reminds me very much of being in Sudan. So this atmosphere of being in a Muslim African country, it has a specific atmosphere to it. And it comes from Islam as a culture. I mean, you see people, you hear the azan, you see glimpses of the men in the mosques praying, people are washing with water, there's kettles in the bathrooms, things like that, these little things. This is Almighty, and that He's watching me, and that, I'm going to be accountable for my actions and for my thoughts. So therefore, to me, this is very important. I was brought up, my father was very liberal, and it was my mother and my grandmother who were religious. So I was taught religion by women. And that makes it very personal. That makes it more private. So moving in liberal circles, I'm aware that people are not everybody is religious, and not everybody is practicing, of course. So I'm familiar with all this. So when I came to write Minaret, this is the story that I wrote of this young girl who finds herself in London because of a military coup in Sudan, and she wasn't religious when she was in Sudan, but then when she goes to London, Minaret as this kind of journey, a spiritual journey in a way. And one of the things that happens to her is that she wasn't wearing hijab when she was in Sudan, and then when she went to London to wore hijab. And I think that part of it is certainly created a lot of interest in the West, to the extent that it's been my most best-selling novel continues to be Minaret, because of this huge interest in the issue of the hijab, I think. Yeah.
Madam, I want to contrast that to how I have read your books, and in particular, placing you within the company of someone like Mariam Abba and Aminata Sufal. And in their books, I feel they have, especially Mariam Abba, portrays the plight of a certain type of African woman, West African woman, who so happens to be Muslim. And so I want to explore with you if that's how you are writing the women and faith in your books, or would you want, or am I misreading it? Should my reading of religion play a greater role in your books?
Well, interestingly, because I am a Muslim, when people read my books, they probably expect to see that my characters are Muslims. But for those who have read more than 2 or 3 of my books, you realize that I am more secular in my books. And this may have been as a result of my social background. My father, who was in Borno, born in Borno and a Muslim, moved to a Christian settlement in Adamawa, where I was born. And he moved because there was a hospital. He had a lung cancer. So we settled I was born in Adamawa, he moved to Adamawa. And it was a big missionary hospital. And the practice was that as a patient, early in the morning, as a patient, you have to congregate and you pray. Okay, the Christian prayer. In the night, you pray the Christian prayer before you go to bed. So my father ended up being converted into Christianity. But because all our relations were in Borno, they would come to Adamawa to look for treatment, and they were Muslims. So I was caught up between the two, and I was, I went to a mission school as well, but the larger family were Muslims. So it's like my cousins, my aunts, my nephews, and the rest of them were Muslims. So to cut a long story short, we were 6 children in the family. 3 of us ended up being Christians and 3 Muslims and Islam. And it would be unrealistic if all my characters are Muslims, because I am in this mixed religious group. So you will see that my characters, I don't focus especially on a particular religion. I try to write for humanity, because basically our challenges are the same. And the way that I've been brought up, I believe we all serve one God. And as a result of my background, I have no conflict whatever as far as religion is concerned. So most of the time I'm surprised when we have all these religious crises, because I don't see the challenges.
I want to ask a question about women and the state of women as you see it, and however you want to address the issue in whatever geographical area. As you have written your books, I think, and I'm thinking particularly about the descendants, with the matriarch and Seitu, who is educated, and the plight of Penny, who is not. So can you comment on whether you see changes, or whether you see things as being worse, and where the forces of oppression are particularly concentrated in women's lives?
Well, I'm happy you touched on descendants, because that is why I actually talked about the movement of my family, with Setu as the major character, who came from the Muslim background, but she came with the VVF disease because she was married at a very early age. Well, something triggered that off, because when I was young, about 6 or 7 years old, one of my we didn't know what it was, but we follow her around. We can see the pain she was in. And when I was old enough to know what VVF was, I got the inspiration. I used my experience of knowing my cousin and what she went through, and I imagined what would have happened if Setu were to be educated the Western way, that her life could turn around. So this single character, I really got the inspiration from an actual human being, an actual person who was related to me, who had VVF. But that's as far as the story goes, because she got cured quite okay, but she went.
I was asking whether you've seen an improvement.
A lot, and it's incredible how even in the villages now, you see the movement from the villages to the city, and you see girls getting educated, and this question of child bride is going down. And VVF, as we know, in those days, we still have the problem, but it has been reduced to a great extent.
So I want to ask the third, there is the matriarch, but between the two granddaughters, between the traditional devastation that is visited upon Penny in her early marriage and the liberation that is afforded because of her Western education. So is there no...
I don't quite understand. You want a middle path?
I'm asking... Is it possible for us to get the liberation without going through the purely Western way?
Okay, all right. You know, the problem, we have Islamic education, which is very, very important for the female child. But unfortunately, Islamic education and what we call Western education, you combine the two, you take the best from the two worlds, I think you'll have a wonderful life.
Okay. Yes.
I hope I've answered.
Yes, you have. Thank you. So, Leila, I wanted to ask you about, in your work, you focus a lot on migrants and the immigrants, the Muslim woman immigrant in the world about it. So how does that look for Muslim women of faith in the West?
Well, of course, the situation now is complicated since September 11 and since, all the terrorist attacks that have happened in Europe. And recently there's been an, increase, like this past year, there's been, a number of attacks. So this, of course, brings with it the Islamophobia and, retaliation against Muslims, and it also causes Muslims to feel that they feel guilty when there is a terrorist attack. At the same time, they feel that they don't want to apologize, because why should they apologize for something that they don't support and they can't relate to it? There's a lot of low self-esteem amongst Muslims, and that also, brings with it a kind of defiance. There's a lot of young people, they feel ashamed that activists, and they need to be defensive, and it's not a healthy atmosphere to be in. It's difficult to write in this atmosphere. It's difficult to put all this behind me, not to feel it, and to continue to write in a way that is not deliberately, answering questions, not deliberately explaining, not deliberately, smashing stereotypes, and this kind of writing, which is not going to be good writing. And at the end, this is really what I care about, that my writing is good and it is of a high standard. So that is one of...
You set up a relationship that mirrors what you're talking about in a bit. And Shamar, who is the...
Samar,
who is the Sudanese woman, and she is in a relationship with a British guy. Anyway, you get a sense in your writing that you are explanation of Sudan to her fiancé.
Yeah.
The same books that you have.
Okay.
Which is the ideal.
Just the ideal.
Is the ideal. So have you stepped away from actively wanting to explain Sudan?
Well, I think with the translator, of course, I was writing it in the late 1990s. It was published. So, and then comes the title of the book, and that comes her role as a translator, not just from Arabic to English, but actually translating a culture or a faith. So there is less to explain nowadays because of people, moving around. There's the internet. There's a sense that there is less need to explain. The reader is actually more familiar. So many words, for example, when I wrote the translator, I had specific words that I put in italics, hijab, azan, things like that. These words have now entered the English dictionary, and so I no longer need to put them in italics, and I don't longer need to explain them. I never liked the idea of the gloss words.
Okay.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. So going back to my title, and it says more than a hijab. We'll talk about the hijab now, and a very short time. And I want to tie that into whether there are overreaching or common themes in the writing of Muslim women around the world, whether there is such a thing as a common theme. And then to tie that to the hijab, because in the world we live in, it has become the obvious visual representation of a religion. So that's what I want to talk about. You can give me your thoughts on the hijab or not, whether there are.
Well, I will give you my thoughts on the hijab. The hijab, as we know it today, the definition is the hijab is a covering for the head, but now it has come to represent the full hijab covered from the head down. It has so many names. Jalbab also goes into that direction, and himar also goes in that direction. Muslim women have used the hijab for 1400 years. And there was no problem. People did not raise any question about the dressing of the Muslim. The hijab has also been used by other people of different religion. I actually went to the internet and took out the photograph of the Roman Catholic nuns whose hijab, look very similar to that of the Muslims, covered from top to bottom. And the Victorian women who dressed, fully dressed. Now, there was no question about the hijab because the hijab has always been the symbol of decency, respect, honor, and I have said decency, respect, honor, and modesty. Now, over the years, something happened to the hijab. People have started fearing the hijab. Personally, I have several experiences of wearing the hijab. I do wear the hijab, and the hijab doesn't only mean one single dress. It can, if you are covered from head to toe, that is the hijab. I had some experiences with the hijab when I went to the West. One was in UK, Heathrow Airport. I was going for a reading. That was in 1994 or so. From UK, I was going to Amsterdam to read my books. And then I was covered in a hijab, and I was carrying a carton of the stillborn, my books. So the immigration officers, they called me and said, "What's in the carton?" I said, "There are books." "Where are you going to?" I said, "Amsterdam." "What are you going to do in Amsterdam?" I was all covered in. I said I was going for a reading tour. Reading? "Whose books are these?" I said, "My books." They just looked at each other and started laughing. So they removed a copy. And they said, "Who wrote this book?" I said, "I did." Then they looked at each other again. You know, the suspicion and the hostility is like this woman in hijab. Is she capable of writing such a book? I said, this book was published here in the UK. Harlow Longman, it was published here in the UK. Are you sure you are the owner of the book? I brought out my passport. I said, I'm the owner. Well, they let me go, but I felt humiliated. And I know it was only because of the way I was dressed. And sorry to take more time, but the second one was just in 2012 when I went to Dallas, all covered up in hijab. I was asked to remove even the scarf inside, and they took my picture with my head uncovered. Well, I believed then that it wasn't just because I was a Muslim, but I was a Nigerian. Yes. So you come across some hostility, some embarrassment, some suspicion, which we didn't have in those days. It is happening now because of several things that are going on. And we can't deceive ourselves. We have to be very frank about that. I come from an area where we are faced with Boko Haram. And I have relations that have been affected by Boko Haram. And I know that women had abused the himar or the hijab to hide explosives. That also could account for some of the suspicion and the hostility that is going on. But it is a whole movement of things happening. But hijab on its own is not just a cloth. In Islam, when they said hijab, it's not only the clothes you put on. It's a symbol of so many things. Our eyes, they are also hijab. We have been asked that a Muslim woman should not gaze at a man, look at a man while talking to a man. In other cultures, that is interpreted as rudeness if you are not looking at somebody as you are talking to somebody. But in Islam, it's a hijab. You should avert your eyes while speaking to a man who is not a family member. Now that is a hijab. Your lips is a hijab to your tongue. You close your lips, you don't talk bad about people. The lips act as a hijab. Even your ears, when there is a conversation that is not good, you use your leg as a hijab to walk away from where there's a bad conversation. That is also a hijab. So is your hand. You restrain your hand from, when you restrain your hand from doing something bad like stealing, that is a hijab. So a hijab is something that covers you. It's a veil that prevents you from doing something you shouldn't be doing. And it's also a distancing. It's a space you put between you and the world. Thank you.
So, Leila, I want you to, in fact, when we were sitting in the room out there, I was talking about, I had also looked at it as people feeling the right to a woman's interiority. In other words, if a woman is covered up, then there is an assumption that definitely you don't know who she is. And we have a right to know who women are in other cultures. But if I am dressed like this, I come into a room and I perform. People still don't know who says society must have to women when they want it at different times and how they perceive it. So at one time you must be open, another time, and it's all about women not being allowed to have interior lives. We must be exposed. So whether they expose the sanctions only at home, or whether they expose the sanctioned everywhere, there is a right society has to, that it feels it has the power to women's lives, and we must give that up upon demand when they demand it. So I want you to talk a little bit about that and how you approach the hijab.
Well, I think that, I mean, what you're saying is there's power involved. I mean, every culture or every time has a dress code. People really are not free to dress what they like. They will dress what they find in the shops to wear, you know. But some of these rules are usually unspoken, you know, like we're all wearing shoes. If maybe somebody wants to walk barefooted, we will find them strange. But we don't have a rule saying everybody has to wear shoes. So these rules are unspoken, and a lot of this unspoken stuff is to do with power, is to do with who is the one who is, who is deciding what is normal and what is not normal, you know. And then the person who's dressed not normally, then they're the ones who have to explain themselves. They're the ones who have to justify themselves. But we, the normal ones, we don't have to justify ourselves. So it's different, you know, codes. It's different. You know, it really comes back to the question of the power. I tend to see it very much as very, very personal. I mean, this is a kind of worship, you know, and with worship, you have to walk a very balanced line between sincerity. You really need to do what you're doing because you're sincere, not because of other people, okay? And this is hard. And then on the other side, you have to be careful not to be proud of what you're doing, you know, which is what sometimes I see young women wearing the hijab or wearing the face veil in a kind of defiant way, like, it's a big deal that I'm covering my face. No, it's not a big deal, because you need to be humble in the eyes of your Lord when you're doing your worship. So it's keeping these things in balance. This is an ideal kind of situation, which is what we have to do as if you would wear, but that's it, I suppose.
That's good. Thank you. So I'm going to ask two questions as I do, and I'm going to tie them in because in my head they are connected. One, are you a feminist or a womanist? And two, what are your influences in your writing? Like which writers have influenced you?
Of course, I'm influenced by, the Sudanese writer Tayyip Saleh, the Egyptian writer Najib Mahfouz, Ahdaf Suwaif, who writes in English. I read a lot of Bucci Emechita, and the Scottish writers, because I started writing in Scotland. So there's a whole influence of the people that you're reading at the time. Yeah. In terms of the feminism and the womanism, when I'm in Sudan, I feel I'm a feminist because I support the issues that are there going on. The education for women, the campaign against FGM, not opposing child marriage. These are issues that I the insistence on equality and total equality is hard for me because I've come very much from a patriarchal society. I find myself, I'm not opposed to patriarchy, but I'm opposed to injustice, and I do feel it's important to have justice for women, yeah.
Okay, so then let me ask a provocative question. Do you read Nawal El-Saadawi?
Yes, I do
like
read.
her? Okay.
Well, I like her nonfiction work. I think her autobiography is brilliant. I think her the memoirs of the prison, is much superior to the fiction. Yeah.
Okay.
But again, I find that her ideals are quite too radical for us as as North African Muslim women. And I don't think that very little of what she has wished for over the years has actually taken place. I mean, the Egyptian woman nowadays is not really aspiring to become that kind of person, that kind of woman. Yeah.
Same question. Are you a feminist, and your influences or recommendations?
Okay. For over 30 years, I've been running away from the label feminist because this is one of the most common questions people ask me. Are you a feminist? And I never knew what feminism was all about. When my first book came out, The Stillborn, the first review was that there is a feminist had come out from northern Nigeria. And I was a bit baffled because at that time, I didn't know about the ideology. That prompted me to write my PhD thesis on feminism. And Nawal El-Saadawi was the special author I worked on. And when I learned about radical feminism, I refused absolutely to be associated with feminism. If you define feminism as somebody who advocates for female empowerment, economic, psychological, political, social, a woman who is fighting that other women should attain this kind of freedom, then I'm a feminist. But if you are asking me if I want equality with a man, then I'm not a feminist because I don't want to be a man. I have always given this analogy. I have always said, I even wrote a paper on it, that I see, the roles of a man and a woman. I compare it with that of the brain and the heart. The heart cannot say to the brain, I am equal with you or more important than you. And the brain cannot say the same thing of the heart, that I am equal or more superior than you, because they have to work together for the human being to live. Yes. So that's how the genders are. We complement each other. I don't want to be a man because God has made me a woman with my roles. And that's why I stand.
Can I just
the
add?
other question about...
I wanted to add something. I think also the difference between the feminism that we have in Muslim countries and in the West is that actually in Muslim countries it was the men who started the feminism. Yes. It was never a movement that came organically from women. It was Muslim women traveling to the West and admiring Western women and then coming back and saying, this is what we want for our daughters, and this is what we want for our wives. And they're the ones who started the schools and the education. So a lot of the advancement of Muslim women came with the support and the help of Muslim men, of progressive Muslim men. And I think that this makes it different than Western feminists who had to fight against men for the right to vote. We didn't have to fight for this. They had to fight to enter university. We didn't have to fight men for this. So I hope that this will continue. I hope that Saudi Arabian men will demand that their wives drive, and
I asked a question about your influences, writers you read.
Yes, well, I was a literature student and a literature lecturer, and I had read tons of books, and there are a lot of authors I really admire. I admire Chinua Achebe a lot. I like Mariam Abba, so long a letter, because she captured it all. And many other writers. But
I'm going to open it up for questions now. So, right here. Where's the mic? Right here. She has her hand up.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to suggest a slight adjustment to your question regarding a common thread passing through the writings of Muslim women. What I want to add is, do we ask, a common thread that does not pass through the writings of Muslim women, like talking about certain things like sex, love, things like that, apart from that talking about, yes, Islam and Sharia, are there no-go areas unwritten? Secondly, talking about the hijab, I'd like to ask, do you think that possibly over time the questions surrounding or movements for the protection of the rights of women and freedom, women's freedom, even if it's feminist movement, would have, apart from terrorism, brought to the fore the perception that the hijab is a symbol of oppression? Remember, to the extent that women now call it removing the veil. So I wonder. Thank you.
So I have one comment and a question. The comment is a response to Leila saying that the differences in the feminist movements in the West and in Muslim countries is that in Muslim countries it is our men that are helping propel the movement. I disagree, because I think there's no uniformity across the Muslim world on what happens with women. If you look at the example of Saudi Arabia, which you spoke about, women still can't drive. Women still are hampered by the guardianship system. They can't go anywhere without a man, even if he's a 12-year-old boy. So there's the infantilization of women. And so I think it's a little bit more complicated and nuanced than just, a general blanket and saying that this is the way it is in the West. And then the second actually is a question that I'd like to ask the both of you. This distinction that people like to make between different strands of feminism and the fact that feminism is now a bad word, it is almost as if there's a deliberate attempt to knock women's heads against each other so that you get women fighting each other, because there is, the word I think is like there are women who are seen to be bad because they're pushing for certain, and it almost seems as if it's patriarchy that is deliberately setting out to cause this distinction about what women who are feminists and want it this way and that way. And I'd like you to comment on that, conflict, if possible.
I want to say well done to the Zainab Al-Kali and Kina. They have done well. Secondly, I want to add something about the hijab. I did a research around 20 or 25 years ago to write a book about married couples. I named the book Nasihar Gama'aura in Hausa. My research showed me that the hijab originated from Iran. It is not an Arabic hijab. It started from the Iran. The Iranian people, the men insist their women wear this long black hijab to cover themselves. They even build open spaces in their houses so that their women can go out in the night and rest without the men seeing them. So Islamically, a hijab means you put something decent in your body, you cover yourself. Like myself, I'm wearing hijab.
So we'll take the answers to the first three questions. The first one was, is there a common thread? I didn't understand that question.
Yes. What I asked is, the question is there a common thread?
Running through,
Yeah, but I want to know if there's a common thread that unspoken, that is no-go area.
Oh, okay.
Their subject, yeah.
Okay.
Easier.
Okay. Taboo subjects.
Maybe I should hazard that answer. Many a times I've been accused that I run away from touching certain issues because maybe I'm afraid of the society in which I come from. There are certain very sensitive issues that, as a writer, if you are not well versed in them, in the Islamic way, you may run into trouble. You will have to work with the Hadith and the Quran if you really want to write about women issues. If you don't do that, you may blunder, you may make mistakes, and you know the repercussion. In as much as I would like to touch on certain issues, I must confess I have been a little bit careful. There are issues that cut across religions, like polygamy. Many people believe polygamy is an Islamic thing, and polygamy is not an Islamic thing. You see polygamy cutting across a lot of beliefs, even among Christians, traditionalists, and the rest of them. So this comes from patriarchy, male-dominated society. And I think quite a number of Muslim women would touch on issues like polygamy. Even the VVF, early marriage, it's not an Islamic thing. We have other cultures. It's more cultural than Islamic. We have other cultures with the same problem, marrying their children at a very early age. So often I would prefer to address the issue as a general issue, not confined to Islam alone. Circumcision, again, maybe when we in Sudan, because Sudan is largely an Islamic place, the West tend to emphasize the country, not even in the northern part of the country. Female circumcision, please. Female circumcision. Thank you very much. So we don't even hear of female circumcision in the north. In those days, the Shua Arabs were doing it. Nowadays, you don't even hear about female circumcision. So it is not an Islamic thing. So there are challenges, some challenges that cut across. And we boil down to the fact that it's springing from patriarchy, not from religion, not Islamic religion, not Christianity, not Hinduism, it's coming from patriarchy.
Okay. I wanted you to also touch upon
Yeah.
Oh, so you want to answer the question on conflict in feminism?
No, specifically what is it
Okay.
Farida said about...
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes. I agree with you that all the infantilization of women. What I meant was that the successful way to get out of this is for progressive, enlightened Saudi Arabian men, for them to promote the emancipation of the Saudi Arabian women. For Saudi Arabian women themselves to imagine that they would fight for their freedoms, supported by other Muslim women or supported by the West. This route, I don't think, is going to be as successful as Saudi Arabian, enlightened Saudi Arabian men taking the responsibility. This is their responsibility, the men who are there. And there are Saudi Arabian men who are highly educated, they're enlightened, and they know that this is wrong. And it is their responsibility to fight for their daughters and for their wives. Yeah, that's what I meant.
You touch upon them.
I think it's important for the writing to be good, which is then my main concern, is to be confident. You have to really write with confidence for it to flow, for it to not to look awkward, So if you are yourself, you've been brought up, maybe you're shy to talk about certain things. You're not used to calling a spade, or you are not in the writing. It will also come out as being shy. So and that was the case also for the best women writers. I mean, look at Charlotte Bronte or Jane Austen. I mean, they were very restrained in their writing, and yet their novels are read everywhere. I never equate explicit scenes with excellence. Never. I've never made this mistake. I would rather read Anna Karenina, any day than the modern stories of adultery that tell me every single detail. And I would not read that. Yeah, I would not read that, because...
But also, if I can chime in, but I think it's also, I'm not a writer, I'm a reader. But I think it's also where we go to look for these sensitive issues. We spent a lot of time yesterday talking about it, but there is a book, A Distant View of the Minaret, by Alifa Rafat. And she wrote in Arabic. She was a married woman, a devout Muslim. It's a collection of short stories. And the first story, the wife is lying in bed, actually chastising, and she's having a monologue with herself, and she's chastising her husband for not sexually fulfilling her. And it's explicit in a way, because in her mind and in her marriage contract, it's her husband's responsibility to sexually satisfy her, to have sex and sexually satisfy her. And that particular theme pitches up many times in the book, and it's the first time a woman of that generation. So it's also where we look for the sensitive issues, and that it's been covered anyway. The conflict in feminism, the differences.
Well, the differences are real. Let me tell you, they are really real, because as I told you to a point, and that was the point when the Arab men in Egypt, in Upper North and the rest, that was when Arab men supported women, felt they had been able to achieve most of the rights they were looking for. The rights for contraception, abortion, voting, being educated in the male-dominated profession, what we call male-dominated profession, doctors, engineers, pilots, when they were able to achieve, when they were able to reach a certain level of achievement, feminism as a movement took another turn. They had nothing to fight for again. They have achieved what they wanted to achieve. So feminism became something else. Now they want the right to their own body. That they want to own their own body. this is when, or that was when, women started single parenthood, that a woman can have a child without declaring who the father is. One, lesbianism, a woman can marry another woman and they can even adopt children and raise them. Well, these are, as far as we Africans are concerned, these are mind-boggling ideologies, because I can't imagine marrying a woman. What is that for? And why male pro-feminists, even in the West, there were men who were supporting feminism fully, but when women started asking for those ridiculous rights, those men withdrew, and it was at that point that even Arab men started withdrawing from supporting their women, because, I mean, you will agree with me, what is that? So,
to you particularly, the person says, it's interesting the statement that Muslim women have worn the hijab for 1400 years without complaint. Considering how rarely we previously heard female Muslim voices, is it possible that we did not hear of complaints previously, mainly because the supposed complainants did not have much of a voice or a receptive listenership to? So the person is asking that. Yeah. The person is asking that since we rarely, he or she says, since we rarely heard women's voice, Muslim women's voices, the assumption you made that, he's questioning the assumption that women have worn it willingly and happily for 1400 years. Since we rarely for 1400 years.
Well, I don't know, but speaking for myself, I don't see what is wrong with wearing a decent apparel, the hijab. What is happening these days, where the wearing of hijab in some parts of this country, the wearing has been abused. I know, coming from the Northeast, that all my female children were wearing hijab and the outer covering, the jalbab. They were wearing those. But when women started hiding explosives, the soldiers would stop young girls wearing hijab and they would look under the hijab as a security measure. So, in a way, we had to discourage our girls from wearing the loose hijab because they could be mistaken for yes. There were no complaints. I don't think women don't complain about wearing the hijab. That's why I said I don't know. But
no, I think some do. I mean, some young girls feel that they're forced to wear it. Their father forces them on it, or their mother forces them on it, and they don't want to wear it. I mean, it's a personal choice, you know. They feel why can't they dress fashionably? It's not fashionable. Why can't they dress fashionably like other young ladies? So I think really nobody should wear it unless they want to wear it.
Yeah. Well, also. Sorry, but I want to give you a rejoinder. It's just It's just to add to what she is saying. I'm not disagreeing with you. I just want to give an experience and to agree with you that in some places, because when I said we are not forced to wear hijab, I'm actually talking of my own country here. I remember traveling to the Umrah with my husband in the 80s, late 80s. We were traveling from the UK to Jeddah for the Lesser Hajj. And on the plane, Arab girls were making a lot of noise on the plane, quite okay. 30 minutes before we descend, it was announced we were about to descend. We saw one by one, they were going to the bathroom, they were going to the loo. Out, they were all draped from head to. So I turned to my husband, I said, where are the girls?
Exactly.
He said, they have changed their wear because we are now going to Jeddah, and they're expected to be like that.
Yeah.
Well, this explains
Yes.
that in some areas they are actually forced.
There's a young woman in the back. You have a question?
Controversy, the hijab.
Okay.
I too was engaged in an intellectual discourse of this same nature sometime back last year in the United States, and I think I learned a lot about the hijab, the origin, the culture, much more than I did while I was back home here. I think there's been a lot of politicking and tradition that has been infused into the concept of hijab. Islamically, hijab means covering. I am covered. But there are people that will insult me. See, it's about morality. It's about you as a person. And yes, my mom is Zainab Al-Ali. Our society actually coerces hijab. And I usually come on to loggerheads with some people. I said, let them breathe, especially the younger generation. Teach them to cover their souls, not their bodies.
Thank you. Thank you. One person over there. No men.
Okay. Here?
My name is Kina, you know.
Should I move forward?
There will be no men asking questions.
So restless. I dashed from over there
Fantastic.
to come here and make a comment. I think it's problematic to talk about the hijab as if it were a singular garment. It has varied not only across space, so in different parts of the world where Islam is practiced, the hijab takes different forms, and it has varied across time. Even in Nigeria, what is considered the hijab varies in different parts of the country and at different times, and it has changed in the time that I have been here since 1993 to date. And in 1993, I should tell everyone that there was a project on women in laws as part of an international research project run by the Solidarity Network, Women Living Under Muslim Laws, just looking at the practice of Islam as opposed to the principle in this point. But I also want to take issue with a statement like, the hijab has been worn for 1400 years. It has not. In Pakistan, Muslim women do not wear veils. In Senegal, which were not veiled until very recently. We cannot talk about hijab and what it means without talking about the influence of Salafi interpretations of Islam and interests. And those interests are played out on the bodies of women. So how women dress is a complex combination of what they choose or are unable to choose in response to certain social, political, and economic conditions. That's what I want to end.
Excuse me, she has one comment. She has a comment, but I'm not taking any more questions. You sit down, you're a man, you are not even close to that thing. Yeah, well, whatever.
Sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, my comment on what the young lady said is just to apologize for generalization.
Okay, all right. So thank you very much. They are around, so, if you men want to ask them questions, meet them at lunch. Thank you very much to Leila Bwelela, and thank you very much to Zainab Al-Ali. It's been wonderful.
A big round of applause to Kina Likimani. all the way from, for you, just little bits of information. The first one is,